Now there are some very good uses for WD-40. Realize that it's got two main properties. One is it's a water dispersant. So let's say you go through flood water, or you were dumb enough to hose off your engine bay with one of those big water sprayers at one of those do-it-yourself car washes, and you got water in all the electronics. You can spray this all over the electronics to disperse the water. And the other property is that it can loosen up rust particles. So you got old rusty bolts, nuts you can't get off. You can spray them all over, let them soak overnight or a couple of days if you're in no hurry. And they can do wonders on that. And to prevent rust, especially on bare metal or even painted metal that's old, kind of cracked, they have these giant big blast ones. I know guys up north, they buy cases of this stuff. And then they spray all around the bottom of their truck and their wheel wells and the suspension arms and everything to keep all that salt water from corroding stuff in the winter. And here in Texas, I know guys that use it in Galveston, near the beach. They'll spray their stuff to protect it, to keep it from being corroded by the salt water air that blows in from the Gulf. If you got an old-fashioned car like mine that still has a key, you can stick the key in, lubricate it all inside, then quick wipe the excess off. And of course you can do the same thing on your ignition key. Just spray the switch, then wiggle it around a little. Now, I know a lot of people are going to whine about that. They'll say, oh, Scotty, you shouldn't use it on locks. Well, heck, yeah, there's a lot of other sprays you can use. I never had a problem. The WD-40 is not going to hurt any electronic parts. If you have a system where the ignition switch is right on the bottom where the key is, it doesn't hurt anything. And yeah, there's other stuff out there that people swear by, but I've been using this stuff for 50 years. I've never had to replace a lock switch on any of my Toyotas, and they do wear out eventually on Toyotas. And there's something you can partially use WD-40 for. Let's say your door hinges are getting rusty. We just open it up and spray the rusty hinges. Then you can let it soak for a few days, but then you should wipe any excess off and use this. Now this is WD-40 water-resistant silicone spray. It's not the WD-40 normal one. It's just the company makes a silicone spray too. You can use any silicone lubricant you want. But then you spray the hinges with the silicone lubricant because that's a pure lubricant and that will lubricate it over time. The WD-40 isn't a true lubricant. It can lube a little bit, but you'd want to do hinges, any kind of thing that moves, with an actual lubricant, so it's lubricating while you use it. If you use a WD-40, you'd have to keep spraying it on because it's not going to lubricate it over time, and the noise would come back. But with this, the silicone stuff is pretty water impermeable. You can only have to spray it 2 or 3 times a year, and the squeaks will probably go away. And one thing I like about the regular WD-40 is they got these cool little tiny cans. I leave them in the trunk of my cars. So if there's ever any kind of an emergency, like so maybe you go through a big puddle and the car stops running because everything got wet, you can get this out and you can spray it all over the electronics so that it'll disperse the water and you'll be able to drive on. They're cute little handy things, you know, and you get some crazy squeak that's driving you nuts while you're on vacation, you can just get the little can out and spray it away. The top 5 things you can do to fix your car using duct tape. Now, duct tape is pretty much a generic term, and I found over the years, I used to use the silver stuff, but hey, this black Gorilla Tape duct tape is actually stronger than all of them. It's the only thing I use now. Because it's stronger, and yes, it is a lot harder to rip than the other stuff, but that tells you it's going to last longer too. I've been using this stuff for years now, and that's all I use when I need it. Now, one of the most common usages, say your window fell down and it's raining outside. You pull the window up, then duct tape it in place. And being a Volkswagen, you can see the customer already taped up the passenger one. They use this plain old tape, and you can see it starting to come off. The duct tape actually lasts longer. And a 2-for-1 here. Since it's black trim, if you do a neat job, you can kind of match it and it won't look as bad. Now, a second common usage is radiator hoses. If you're driving down the road and you get a leak in a radiator hose, wrap the tape around it. Do it a bunch of times. And it can often hold for quite some time. You might be able to get wherever you're going. Replace the radiator hose later, but in a pinch, it can save you. Now, the next is body damage. Say you hit somebody on the road or somebody hits you in a parking lot and part of your car's come off. Hey, you can duct tape it on and it'll hold it on for quite some time. Heck, I've had younger drivers that hardly have any money at all, and they duct tape a bunch of stuff on and they drive it that way for years. Now the next use is for cracked air intake lines. To do a really neat job, you take the air intake off, then you would tape it all up and put it back on again. When I was younger and poorer, and when parts for foreign cars cost more, I did that on an Opel that I had, and I drove it 5 years that way, and it still worked perfectly fine. The part cost so much, it was like $150, and that was a lot of money in the 60s. And the last common use is one many people use if they have junkers like this Volkswagen. You keep having all these warning lights coming on, and you find that it's either going to cost a small fortune to fix those systems, or you've already spent a bunch of money, yet they don't fix it right and the lights keep coming on. Here's what you can use this Gorilla duct tape for. There's a horrible, annoying lights. Oh, magically, they're all gone now. You don't see them. As the saying goes, see no evil, speak no evil, hear no evil. At least you don't see any evil now. Except on the other side, well, I guess you can put duct tape over that too if you want. All right, we got a 2015 Ford Escape. It smokes like mad on startup, and we're gonna use a spoon to figure out what the problem is. Yeah, I'm not making it up, this spoon. And my wife will be furious because it's one of her spoons. A good thing she doesn't watch my videos. Now the customer bought this used with 60,000 miles. He's put about another 60,000 miles on it. He paid it off early, so he owns it. And when he starts it up first thing in the morning, it smokes a lot of gray, almost like a diesel. But then it goes away. And interestingly enough, it needs an oil change, so the oil's dirty. But it's still completely full, so it's not burning any oil. We're gonna figure out why it's doing it. Now, this is a 1.6 liter, 4-cylinder, inline, GDI engine, gasoline direction engine, and it's also turbocharged. That's what the EcoBoost stands for. And after a bunch of pulling and shoving, because Ford has one here that's almost impossible to get off, but it does, there's no bolts. We'll take the obnoxious beauty cover off, show you what's happening. It has coil on plug, but you notice on the intake, you don't see any fuel injectors because this is gasoline direct injection. The fuel injectors work at super high pressure. And it also has a turbocharger on it. It's very complex. They're piezoelectric injectors that can put over 1,000 PSI pressure to spray the gas in the engine. All that pressure, when you combine it with the pressure of a turbocharger ramming extra air in the engine, strains the engines a lot. And positively for this engine, on the positive side, hey, it needs an oil change, but the oil's still full. It isn't using any oil. The 1.6s were better engines, but still, it smokes like mad first thing in the morning. So what we're gonna do is the ultimate engine test that anybody can do. Wet dry compression test of the engine. We'll see what kind of shape the engine is. Now, this is the one advantage of a 4-cylinder engine. If you got a V6 engine and you're gonna do a compression test, most of the 9 modern engine designs have one of the 3-cylinder bank, either bank 1 or bank 2, covered by the intake manifold. So in order to take the compression test of those, you have to pull the intake manifold off, which is a royal pain in the behind. This is a 4, so it's easier to do. First, we got to take the coil on plugs off to access the plugs. You can see they're on the top. So good design there. They're easy to get to. Awful long thread for a little bitty coil, but hey. For some unknown reason, Ford has 2 bolts holding the plastic coils on. I don't understand these engineers, but then again, it is Ford. Now this to me makes no sense. They want to make them as cheap as possible. Why on earth do they put 2 bolts to hold the coil in place? I mean, it's total insanity. Now we can push things out of the way and wiggle it and get the coil on. They really didn't care about making them easy to work on, that's for sure. A lot of wiggling, and if the camera wasn't running, a lot of swearing, which I won't do right now. We'll get it out. We gotta take them all out. Now we'll wiggle them all, get them all out. You gotta wiggle them because they get stuck. With 130,000 miles, they're gonna have a lot of stickiness to them. There's number 2, number 3, and number 4, the last one. Of course, it'll be the stinker. All right, we got them all out. Now we gotta take the spark plugs out. We're gonna take all the spark plugs out. We need a magnet for this one. Nothing's accessible. Curse the engineers that designed these things. Now these plugs have been in here. These are the original ones. So we might as well change them. All right, now the fun comes. We got the spark plugs out. We're gonna do a dry compression test. Just the compression reading using a gauge. So the test is screwed in, you crank the engine. Okay, write down the readings for all 4. Okay, crank it again. Okay, now in this case they're all about 155 pounds, give or take 3 or 4 pounds here and there, and that's normal. What you do, it's called relative compression, because none of these gauges are perfectly accurate. You want decent pressure like that, and you want it so that they're all about the same, and they are. So now what you do is get a teaspoonful of oil, about a teaspoon, and put them in one cylinder at a time. First we'll put it in the front cylinder, then we'll test the pressure again, crank it. Okay, and we'll do it for all 4 and compare them. What we're testing for here is the differential. If the pressure goes up quite a bit, that would mean the piston rings are worn, and that tiny bit of oil would make the pressure go higher because the oil seals it for the test. But let's say the pressure was low on one of them. These are all the same, so it doesn't matter all that much. But say one had a lower pressure, and then when you put the oil in, the other ones, the pressure went up 4 or 5 pounds, but that one, it was the same or even less. That would mean that the valve seals are bad on that cylinder, because the valve seals aren't affected by oil. They're on the top of the engine, and that would mean they're leaking and they're sucking oil in, and it's burning oil. Now in this case they hardly changed at all, just a few pounds, but that doesn't surprise me, because if you look at these spark plugs, these are the original spark plugs. If it burned a bunch of oil, they'd be covered in oil carbon and black. They aren't. So this engine is actually in pretty good shape. Now since these are the original plugs, we're going to put new ones in. Get the same ones, exact same ones. They lasted so long, you want to put the same ones back in. They cost more, but what the heck. Make sure you don't cross thread them. A lot of wiggling is needed. You want to get them snug, not too tight, you don't want to break them. These things are chrome plated. They're made so that they're torqued in just right. If you lubricate them, they'll pop out. I've seen guys lubricate them, oh, we don't want them to get stuck. Then later they're driving their own, they pop out of the holes. Just put them in dry. Of course, you got to put all the coil packs back on. Wow, that one actually went on smoothly. Now you got to put on the 8 bolts to hold it in place. No one knows why they used 8 instead of 4, but then again, there's Ford. Now you want to get these on snug, because they don't just hold them on, they help ground them. If you don't get them tight and you screw up in this last thing, it'll start misfiring and you'll wonder what the heck did I do wrong. You got to get them tight because they help ground the coils. So when they're tying them up, basically turn them where, you see, now it's snug, and then just give it a little more tug. It's plastic. You don't want to crack it, but you want to get it snug. That's the best way to do it. Then throw the stupid beauty cover back on. Me, I'd throw it out, but what the hell, it's here. So let's start it up now. You can see there's a little smoke coming out. And as you see, once he revs it up, it stops smoking. But now the check engine light come on, and you see cylinder number 3 has a misfire detected. Now, this often will happen. So 1, 2, this is number 3. You saw the process of taking them off. They're hellacious to get off. They're rubber and they bend. Well, guess what? They got all that mileage on it, over 100,000 miles. A lot of times, you take them out, the coils go bad because they're rubber and plastic. You take them apart, you got to bend them to get it out. It's the only way you can do it. They'll often break. Now here's the old one. It looks perfectly fine, but it's all electronic charges. You got to bend them and stuff. A lot of times, it just goes out. So we'll get another coil for this one. But before we rush to conclusions, I'm going to put the number 3 coil on the number 2 and the 2 on the 3 and see if it moves. Then we'll know the coil's gone. Now, of course, before we do anything, we got to turn the key on. Then got to erase the code. So we'll go to erase codes. Yes. All right. And erase the code. So now let's erase and start it up. And we'll take it for a good ride. Now it's running really good. 127,000 miles. In the drag strip land, let's really give it a test. Not a race car, but here we go. Sounds good. No misfires. I'm impressed by Escape with this many miles on it. The main reason I'm dumping on it hard is I want to see if the misfire will come back, and so far it hasn't, but we're going to drive it some more. Ran like a clock. You can see the check engine light isn't on anymore. And we'll check for codes. There's no freeze frame data. It's running fine. So in this case, what's the lesson to be learned? Always double check everything. When we switch those coils, it stopped misfiring. So what happened somehow, when it was reinstalled, that coil must have been rubbing on something. And when we moved it, it wasn't rubbing anymore, because we didn't even unplug the electrical connection on that one when we took it out. So it's not like, well, we didn't plug it in right. It wasn't even disconnected. You'll find stuff like that happens with all that rubber crap when you can't reach and see inside. Now, who the heck knows? If in a few days it starts misfiring, and the misfire is on cylinder number 2 because we put the number 3 coil on number 2, we would just change the coil. But in this case, we don't have to. Well, now let's get back to it smoking in the morning. I just learned something from the owner. This has been going on for a year and a half. He starts it, he gets smoke, and then it goes right away after a few seconds of driving it. But interestingly enough, this happened right after he took it to the Ford dealer for some updates, servicing. Well, I just figured out why it does what it's doing. Obviously, they reprogrammed the computer. The way cars work these days are, when you start the car cold, the fuel injection system has to pulse the fuel injectors a little bit longer, more milliseconds than usual, to spray extra gas to start a cold engine. Obviously, this thing has been reprogrammed with incorrect software that it starts it makes it too rich, so he gets the smoke coming out of the back because it's only when you start it. Now, seeing that the Ford dealer did this in the first place, he says, is it gonna hurt anything? I said, not gonna hurt anything. And if he took it back, they charged $90 just to look at it. They'll never admit a year and a half later that, you know, they messed up with something. So he'll probably just live with this. It's not hurting anything because he's been doing it for a year and a half and it hasn't gotten any worse. He does not lose coolant. He doesn't burn any engine oil. So obviously, they reprogrammed it incorrectly, making it too rich, so it gives a little bit too much gas only when it's ice cold. Probably he's gonna live with it. Now, Ford, if you're watching this and you know that, hey, we had a reprogramming failure, please contact me and I'll call them up and say, look, they'll reprogram it for free. I doubt if it will happen. Most of the manufacturers no longer like me for telling the truth about mistakes they make, but it makes total logical sense now. And like I say, he's been driving it this way for a year and a half, and yeah, it was a smart move. He needed spark plugs, they were the original ones anyways. The only thing that I gotta say about that is, well, I'll keep you in touch with what happens, but those spark plugs were the original spark plugs. Maybe they didn't fire right in the beginning. So if it no longer smokes, he'll tell me the next few days, then that actually fixes it. But if it continues to smoke, that would mean they just made the fuel injection mixture too rich upon cold startup. It could be reprogrammed, but like I say, that's another ball of wax. It runs fine, so he'll probably live with it if it continues to. We'll find out. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.